And Thomas Aquinas comes up, and you're all teachers as well, right? And so from time to time, someone may say to you, well, John, you can't have your students read Thomas Aquinas. What if they become Roman Catholic? How do we, on the one hand, we're not denying that we, as Protestants, have some serious, significant disagreements with Thomas on, well, we could sit here and probably talk about some of those areas, right? So how do we not, we don't want to, pretend that that's not the case, but and we should take that seriously, but at the same time, how do we go about engaging Thomas, recommending Thomas to read, even like you were saying, Scott, today we're in this position of retrieval, but when we look at some of those Protestant scholastics before us, they just see themselves as part of that same tradition. So how do we hold on to both of those? And what do you say? What do you say to that person that's afraid and says, well, if you tell someone to read, surely they're going to become a Roman Catholic. Now, there have been instances of some Protestants that have become Roman Catholics, whether it has to do with Aquinas or not. But so it's not that that's not real, but at the same time, there is this fear-based mentality that says, let's get rid of Thomas entirely. That's just going to lead people in the wrong direction. I've even seen people say, well, why would you ever read Thomas Aquinas? You can just go read, a John Owen, and he's better anyway. So what's the point? What do you say to some of these types of objections?
Any question? Do these resources belong to us as well, or are they really the property of the Roman Catholic Church or something? When it comes to someone like Thomas, the reason not to just read Owen and pick up what Thomas you need from Owen is that Thomas is truly one of the great theologians of the Church. To develop a capacity for reading Thomas is a great way to equip yourself to continue to grow intellectually, spiritually. I think we want to teach, is it, Newman says to be deep in history is to cease to be Protestant, but actually, I thought, no, actually to be deep in history is very consistent with Protestantism, and you make an argument that it pushes you more towards Protestantism. And so part of the way to address the what about Thomas is just to do better teaching history in general. And so, in talking about, there's a reason Protestants thought Thomas was great on faith and reason, and there's a reason they thought he was really bad on the order of salvation. Mm-hmm. But you have to get into kind of medieval Christendom and what that order of salvation was, and why Thomas is one of the great systematizers of that. And they're talking about why the Reformation was a rejection of that whole system, But why did they not think rejecting that whole system required rejecting Thomas on faith and reason? And as soon as you can start getting to those kinds of questions, you can actually help them to understand the logic of Protestantism even more deeply. And even where they do reject that tradition, I think of some John's work on Thomas and virtue, right? So you've got to kind of get Thomas' understanding of grace and virtue out of your doctrine of justification, right? Because you're misunderstanding justification if you're trying to think of it as based upon God's gracious renewal in us. But once you've done that, all of a sudden, this understanding of the order of salvation that you're rejecting, you can then take his understanding of grace and virtue and put it in the right place in sanctification. So helping students understand the logic of those kinds of things actually, I think, makes them better Protestants, but also able to draw from these rich resources that belong to all of us.
It seems like there's almost a certain freedom there.
Yeah.
Like you're saying, in that case, there's a certain freedom to say, okay, it's wrong here, but I can relocate that where it should go.
Yeah.
I think that, one of the mindsets we have to get people out of is, it's concomitant with modernity. It's the idea of a worldview that is a closed system, or the idea of Hegelian holism, that you can't know any one part of the truth apart from the whole truth. And so it's just an all-contained system, so that if something doesn't fit, or if it's problematic, well, then you set aside the entire body of thought. And that's simply not the way that pre-moderns or early moderns thought. They said, no, I can take this element and I can put it over here, and so that you can pull the very best of it. And so it's a principled eclecticism. We've mentioned that before. And it's the idea that, no, my commitment is to the truth, not to any one school of thought or any one particular theologian. And I think especially in the wake of modernity, with the influence of Romanticism and the hero or the genius theologian, that I have to follow everything that this one thinker says. We set that aside and say, no, it's not any one theologian that is the key to unlocking, the secret mysteries of Scripture, but rather it's like, I'm sure you guys have read this. It's that one statement from the preface to Bavinck's original edition of the Dogmatics, Volume 1, where he says that, Thomas is as much of a father to us Protestants as he is to Rome. So are the rest of the church fathers. They are not the sole property of Rome. They are as much ours as they are theirs. And so, so let's soak it in and let's see what they have to say, and let's learn from them. Yeah, I mean, you certainly have the harmony between faith and reason in a Duns Scotus, and then certainly in an Occam begin to erode, with less of a confidence or an undermining of the legitimacy of a natural theology. You could say that the reformers restore a lot of that, though it wasn't one of their chief concerns. Like you have to read very carefully the opening 5 chapters of Calvin's Institutes to see his version of a natural theology. It's similar in conviction, but somewhat different in how he executes it. And so that largely holds. It becomes clearer in a Turretin, but then it unravels once again in the late scholastic period, where they begin to coordinate not so much as a harmony between faith and reason, but putting reason over faith. And so natural theology kind of unravels from there. That, you can say, that kind of a trend has an impact upon soteriology, at least as it is in Aquinas, for example. Aquinas is a strong proponent of grace, so he's not a Pelagian, in contrast to an Occam or a Beale, they're very Pelagian in the nature, do what is within you and God will not deny you his grace. That whole understanding of soteriology. There's a line in among some historians, who, especially Roman Catholics, who say had Luther encountered Aquinas, maybe the Reformation wouldn't have happened. But instead he encountered Beale and Occam. And I'm not persuaded of that. I think Luther is doing something significantly different enough from Aquinas that he would have been able to see that, no, there's a difference of opinion there. So it certainly gets propelled in the Reformation understanding of soteriology, where there is a significant difference. Maybe this needs some more nuance, but arguably you could say Trent, large in part, codifies Aquinas at the Council of Trent and his understanding of salvation. There's an article that I've read recently that pushes back, that says for Augustine, justification was not an ongoing process, but was a definitive moment in the person's salvation. And so he argues, and I thought somewhat persuasively, that Augustine is more of a predecessor, or at least the ancient roots of the Reformed tradition in its soteriology. So that's something that needs some more teasing out. But I think when you combine the erosion of the chief place of faith in a Reformed soteriology, that began to erode its its understanding of salvation. And so you get a, kind of a, especially towards the end of the 17th century, you get debates among neonomians, legalists, and antinomians as to the proper nature of salvation. And you get some folks that come out in the middle. John Owen is one of those players in those late discussions, at least some of his works earlier on. But there was a careful balance that was lost. But there's a sense in which Aquinas on some of those discussions is an ally, and in others those discussions maybe not so much of an ally, but more of somebody to be criticized. So there was I think going back to what Scott said, there was a principled eclecticism. We'll pull some of this in and we'll push some of that out.
Into that, Fred. If I say to them, don't read that, that's all bad.
It's the forbidden fruit all of a sudden.
Suddenly they want the cookies that are on the table. And but more seriously, it's like saying to them, well, as a Protestant, you don't have any rights to those roots, that heritage. And suddenly that could actually push them to become Roman Catholic, which is so ironic about the fear of, as opposed to saying, be judicious like you would, if you were reading Augustine, or if you're, and understand that there's a sense in which you as a Protestant can say to your Roman Catholic friend, you, on what grounds do you have the sole right or a monopoly on Thomas Aquinas? Are there ways that as a Protestant, actually, we are then stepping into that tradition as well? That tends to then open up a conversation rather than, like you're saying, this is the forbidden fruit. And then suddenly you either just close your mind to it, or you think, oh, if I go for that, then I have to become Roman Catholic. It's very, very black and white.
Yeah.
So,
even when you get to the 16th century, anti-Protestant Roman Catholics, someone like Cardinal Bellarmine.
Yeah.
I read Bellarmine on Christology and think, oh, there's some great stuff here. Like, no one else said it quite that well. I'm going to use that.
Yeah.
And that's someone who, I don't have to guess if he disagreed with Protestantism. He knew all about it and argued against it. And so he's not on my team.
Yeah.
With Aquinas, you're centuries before, though, and he's not an anti-Protestant Roman Catholic. He's got specifiable doctrines that are in definite tension with Protestant claims.
Yeah.
But it's a whole different thing. But I'm saying, even with anti-Protestant Roman Catholics in the 16th century, you can still learn critically from them, and especially in the areas that are...
Protestants did.
What's that?
Protestants did.
Yeah.
Yes. Oh, yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
I think
Yeah,
people
especially in Doctrine of the Trinity. They're like, oh, yeah, have you read the latest Jesuit thing on the Trinity? It's great.
I think